Hello everyone, it's Linda from Sticky with Glitter here. I've had over some time quite a lot of requests asking if I would do a tutorial on how I colour with distress inks, and it's taken me quite a long time to do this, just because I've not had the time to film it. I've had the lesson plans put together for some time. So anyway, I've taken the time today to try and start putting these together for you. And this first lesson, there's no colouring involved in this first one. It's just literally a little pre-lesson to talk about what you will need in order to colour. Okay, so first some basic things before we go on to talk about the colouring mediums, etc. You will need some kind of pot to put water in. I use this little pot that squashes down flat, which I bought from an art shop. But that's simply because I can pop it in a bag and take it with me. So if there's not something somewhere I'm going to put some water in, I have that with me. But you can just use an old cup or a glass or any kind of pot that you like, really. I've used in some places even like a disposable cup. You don't need a lot of water, so it doesn't have to be huge, just enough water to wet your brush and to clean it. So that's that. You will also need something to put your distress inks on. What I've got here is an acrylic block that you put your stamps on for stamping, and a lot of people I know use the same thing. I don't always use that. I sometimes use whatever's to hand, and if you don't have an acrylic block, because you don't use rubber stamps, you only use digis, you can use an old tile, you can use a plate, you can use a CD case or a DVD case, as long as it is non-porous and wipeable, and preferably flat. I mean, you can use a plate, but if you are using pads in particular, it's better to have something flat. You can use something coloured. I like to use clear, clearly see the colours of my inks, and I often put it on something white so that I can see the very light coloured inks show up. Otherwise they don't always, if you don't have something behind it. Then you'll need some kind of absorbent paper, kitchen roll. Sometimes I have a roll of quilted toilet tissue to hand. I just tear that off as I need it, and that's quite useful. But just something to dry your brushes off on so they're not so wet, and also to blot any excess water or ink, but we'll go into that later. But so you just need something absorbent. Brushes. I use 3 sizes of brushes, which is a 00, a 0 and a 000. A 00, if you can only buy one brush, you're probably best off buying a 00. That will do most of the, it will fill most of your colouring needs, a 00. I use a 000 when I've got quite small digits or I want to get into quite small detail. And I use the 0 when I'm doing very large areas, but mostly for background. Okay, so if you can only afford one, get a 00. Otherwise, if you want to buy all 3, you can. I would recommend sable brushes. That's what I use. I find them very good. But if you can't afford sable, a good quality synthetic brush will probably do you almost equally as well. Just don't buy cheap, children's painting brushes. Make sure they're watercolour brushes, so you've got the kind of right type of end. You have different brushes, some are for oil, some are for acrylics, and some are for watercolour, and you want the watercolour brushes. So on to mediums. Obviously, distress inks you can use, and I will go at the end of the series of tutorials, I will go into other mediums that you can use for watercolour colouring, such as Spectrum Aquatint pens and also Inktense pencils. The Spectrum Aquatints are pretty almost identical in the way you use them to Distress ink markers. The Inktense pencils are a little bit different, but as I say, I'll go through that when I finished all the tutorials at the end to discuss alternatives. For now, we're just concentrating on Distress inks themselves. Now, there's 3 ways that you can buy Distress inks. You can get them in pad form. If you already ink the edges of your cards, then you're probably familiar with this type of Distress ink. You can get the refillers, which is what you buy to put more ink on your ink pad when it eventually runs out. And I have to say, the walnut stain ink pad here is the only ink pad I've actually ever had to re-ink, and that's because I use it such a lot on all my on the edges of all my cards. But you can buy the re-inkers, and they come in little glass bottles like this with a little eyedropper type glass dropper inside and the rubber ends. And you can buy Distress ink markers. Distress ink markers are a type of pen. They have one end which is like a type of a brush nib or a felt tip, and the other end is like a little kind of acrylic ball, and that will give you, let's see if I can put it up to the camera, that will give you quite fine detail. Different people use different things or different combinations of things, and it really depends on your personal choice and the type of techniques that you use. And I'll go through that in more detail in my later videos where I discuss techniques. For my personal choice, I use the markers. The reason for this is because they are very easily transportable. They're very portable. You can fit quite a lot of colours in a small space. So for storage, just to say they don't take up a lot of room, they fit. You know, if I'm going to do some colouring when I'm staying away, or I'm taking some colouring into work to do in my lunch break, I can take a few pens in quite easily. They don't take up a lot of room in my bag. They're not going to go everywhere. Obviously with the pads, there's the risk of the lids falling off unless you pack them up nicely, and they take up a bit more room. And if you're storing them one on top of the other, obviously you need to have the colours on the side to see what you're looking for and take off all the other ones, whereas it's easy to kind of grab the pen colour you want and very easy to see immediately what kind of colour you're looking for. And with the bottles, obviously, they're glass bottles. If you're going to put those in a bag, there's more chance that they're going to leak or break. So, yeah, for personal preference in that way. And also with the markers, I like them because you can use some direct marker to paper techniques if you want to. And because they have the fine nib at the end, and I like to use that for detailing sometimes, not always, but sometimes. Okay, so that's my personal preference, but you can use whatever you want. And to be honest, when I first started colouring with Distress inks, trying them out, because let's face it, nobody plunges in and is perfect from the word go, I used some ink pads and I supplemented with a couple of markers. So I bought a couple of markers in colours that I didn't have, and I had a few ink pads that I bought for using on my cards. So I used those first, just purely for economy, because I wasn't sure whether I would continue it. I didn't want to buy a whole set of markers to start off and then find, oh, well, that wasn't for me, and then that was a total waste. I knew I'd use the ink pads, already had them, and the couple of markers were not a great deal of extra money. I have to say, with the Distress inks, they do last an incredibly long time. Both the pads and the markers. I've only ever re-inked the walnut stain pad, as I said, and for the markers, I've actually never needed to replace one yet. I've been colouring since I think 2014 I started in, somewhere near the beginning of 2014, and as I say, I've not replaced the pen as yet, even those that I use most, like the Vintage Photo 4 Skin. I've never had to replace them. And just at the end of this video, I'll go through the colours that you will need to do the tutorials with me. Okay, so let's move on to paper. Now, there are lots of different watercolour papers out there. Now, for personal choice, I can only tell you the two that I use. I'm not going to go into details of other ones. I've not used all of the other ones. Different people like different papers. These are my videos and it's the way I do it, so obviously these are the papers that I use, but I will go through the two papers that I use with you and why I use them. So first is the Langton Extra Smooth Hot Pressed. Okay, so hot pressing the paper makes it nice and smooth, and a lot of people use this paper. Okay, it's lovely paper. I'll just grab a piece out for you. It's not completely white, but it is quite white. It's not yellow or a very deep ivory. It's like a very light ivory white. And it is very smooth. I don't know whether I'll show the other one to you for the grain. I don't know if the grain will show up on the paper, but this is very smooth. What that means is if you're stamping on your paper, it's really like stamping on any other smooth paper or card. You get a nice finish. It's not difficult. Colouring wise, it does give a very nice effect. You can this paper is very good for detailed work. It dries very quickly, which is a bonus, but sometimes not. And I'll explain what I mean by that. Obviously, if you're working and you're impatient like me, you want to get it all done at once. Sometimes you have to wait for something to dry before you go back in, and this paper dries very quickly, so it's easy to just do an area, do another area. By the time you've done that, the first one is dry. It's not a problem. The downside to that is it's not very forgiving. It really sucks up the ink, so it doesn't work as well for direct marker to paper technique. You can use marker to paper technique on it, but you have to have a very light hand. You have to work very quickly, and it doesn't work as well. And generally, when I'm using this paper, I would not use the marker to paper technique. I would just use the brush technique, and we'll go through techniques later in other videos. And it's not very forgiving. It's not very easy to erase your mistakes on this paper. You can erase mistakes by blotting out, by making an area wet and then blotting it with your absorbent paper. But this paper doesn't lift as well because it's already sucked a lot of the colour down into the paper and started drying. You can erase your mistakes, you can lift, but it doesn't lift as well. But because it dries quickly and because it takes the colour well, it is very good for very detailed work. You know, it's not going to all smudge together very easily. So that is the Langton Hot Press. The other paper that I use is the Montval, Canson Montval watercolour paper. This paper, I hope it will show up on camera, I'm not sure that it will, but this paper is textured. I'm not sure whether that will show on camera or not, the texture of that, but it is a textured paper. It's not a highly textured paper, in all honesty, and once they're both coloured up, and you don't notice a huge amount of difference. It's not very easy to see the texture once it's coloured, and you would only probably notice when you put it side by side with a smooth one. It does mean that you have to be a little bit more careful. If you're stamping with a rubber stamp, you need to apply a bit more pressure and make sure it's nice and even. I usually use my Misty when I stamp on this paper, just so that if if I haven't got every area on the first go, I can re-ink those areas and put it down again. And I know obviously that I'm not going to get ghosting or anything. It's going to go on the same spot. So if you've got something like a Misty or Stamp-A-Majig or something like that, where you can stamp right directly on the image again. I would recommend using something like that with this paper. I have stamped with this paper without a MISTI, and you can do it. You just need to be a bit more careful, that's all. Now, the pros and cons of this particular paper. This is the paper I would recommend for beginners. And I still use it a lot. I use it equally as much as the Langton, if not more still. I will tend to use the Langton paper if I've got a small image. I'll go into that in other videos, but it's because of the detail. This paper has got a particular sizing to it. It's got a finish on it, which means that it doesn't soak up the water as quickly. So what that tends to mean is that your colour will lay on the top for a while. Now that's a good thing and a bad thing. It's a good thing because it gives you more time to blend. When you put your colour on, you've then got more time to blend it out without leaving a nasty line. However, that does mean you have to be careful not to have your brushes too wet, not to have too much pigment on your brushes, because as it blends so well, as it doesn't suck it up very quickly, there is a danger that you can put your colour on and blend out, and oh, now you've coloured the whole spot and it all looks the same. There's no definition, no light and dark. That's just something you have to be aware of with the paper. But I would recommend it for beginners because, as I say, it is you've got more time to work, more time to blend. It's also very easy to blot or lift your colour or excess water. As I say, it lays on the top. If you've gone over a line, you can add some water to it, and it will lift up, and you can blot that up and take the colour, and you can do that for quite a while even afterwards. So that does make it a lot easier to work with if you're a little bit unsure of what you're doing, or you don't work particularly quickly, etc. But I will go through techniques with both papers in my videos later. But as I say, for now, feel free to get both papers. If you've got friends who watercolour and use these papers, you know, you can beg a small piece of each to see the differences for yourself. If not, buy a small pad. You can get quite small pads of watercolour paper. Watercolour paper is quite expensive, but as I say, you can buy small pads to start off and see what you like. If you can only afford the one for now, get the Canson, because I would recommend working with that first. And then you can try the Langton later on. Once you've decided what paper you like, or if like me you like both, and you can afford it and have got storage space, I would very much recommend getting the largest size you can afford and store, because it does work out more economical. Oh, my video camera decided to refocus itself there. It does work out much more economical, pennies per inch or whatever, to buy the larger sizes. You can get lots of different images on there. And another thing I will go through in later videos with you is, if you're using digis, how to go about using these papers through your printer, because they are quite heavyweight papers, and for most printers they probably won't fit through as one sheet. But as I say, I'll go through that with you later. For now, make sure that you have your paper and your mediums and the other bits and pieces that you need. Colour wise, you can start off with just a few, and you can get as many as you want. I have got all the colours now, and they're often bringing out new ones or limited edition ones. But the ones that I use the most, you will need a vintage photo for skin. Not everybody uses the same colour for skin. Some people use tattered rose, tea dye, and I actually didn't start out using the vintage photo, but I use it now and I very much prefer that. Hair colours, if you get an antique linen and a walnut stain, that will do you most of your blonde colours to mid-brown. And then if you get hickory smoke and black soot, you can do black hair. I use all sorts of different colours for blush or for lips, but if you get a Victorian velvet, you can do the blush and the lips with that, and you can also use it for clothing, same as the hickory smoke and the black soot, and as I say, even the walnut stain and the antique linen you can use for clothing. You can get other colours later on, and if you want to get some other colours now, that's fine, or if you have them already. But those are the 6 colours that I would recommend for starting with, because you can do a full picture with that. Okay, so thank you very much for watching. If you have found this video helpful, please like and subscribe, and I will be along later with my colouring videos. See you then. Bye bye.